Subscribe to my YouTube channel for deeply emotional, romantic, and mature stories that echo through your heart. Don't forget to like, share, and comment to support meaningful storytelling. The rain had stopped, but Eleanor's tears hadn't. She sat on the cold concrete curb outside the upscale restaurant. Her emerald dress now wrinkled and stained with the salt of her disappointment. The valet parking attendants cast sympathetic glances her way, but none dared approach the woman, who looked like a broken piece of art that it was supposed to be their anniversary dinner. 7 years of marriage, and Marcus had promised this time would be different. This time he wouldn't cancel. This time work wouldn't come first. But as the minutes turned to hours, Elena realized she was living the same story she'd been telling herself for months, maybe years. The black Mercedes pulled up slowly, its headlights cutting through the evening mist. Elena barely looked up, assuming it was just another wealthy patron arriving for their evening meal. But when the car stopped directly in front of her, and the driver's window rolled down, her breath caught in her throat. "Mrs. Chun?" The voice was deep, concerned, and unmistakably familiar. Elena lifted her head to see Alexander Stone, Marcus's boss, leaning out of his car. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it, and his usually perfect suit jacket was hanging loose. But it was his eyes that made her heart skip. They held a gentleness she'd never seen in the boardroom. "Mr. Stone," she managed, quickly wiping at her cheeks. I didn't expect to see you here. The question is, what are you doing sitting alone on a curb in the rain?" Alexander turned off his engine and stepped out of the car. He was tall, probably 6'2", with the kind of presence that commanded attention without trying. "Where's Marcus?" Elena's laugh came out bitter and hollow. "That's a very good question. One I've been asking myself for the past 2 hours. Alexander's jaw tightened. He knew Marcus well too well, perhaps. The man was brilliant at his job. But Alexander had always suspected there were cracks in his personal life. Seeing Elena like this, vulnerable and alone, confirmed his worst fears. "Come on," Alexander said gently, extending his hand. "Let me drive you home." "I can call a cab," Elena protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "Elena," the way he said her name, soft and careful, made her look up at him properly for the first time. "Please, let me help you." There was something in his tone that made her defenses crumble. She took his hand, allowing him to help her to her feet. His touch was warm, steady, and for a moment, she felt less alone than she had in months. The ride to her house was quiet at first. Alexander kept glancing at her through the rearview mirror, noting how she stared out the window with unseeing eyes. The city lights blurred past them, creating a kaleidoscope of colors that seemed to match the chaos in Elena's heart. "How long has this been going on?" Alexander asked quietly when they stopped at a red light. Elena's reflection in the window showed a woman who looked older than her 32 years. "What do you mean?" "Marcus missing important events. Leaving you waiting." She turned to face him then, studying his profile in the dim light of the car. "Why do you care, Mr. Stone?" Alexander was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "Because I've seen what happens when work becomes more important than the people we love. I've lived it." He paused. "And because no one should have to sit alone on a curb on their anniversary." The light turned green, and they drove in silence until they reached Elena's neighborhood. It was a quiet suburban street lined with modest homes, each one glowing warmly from within. Eleanor's house, however, was dark. "Would you like to come in? For coffee?" The invitation slipped out before Elena could stop herself. "I mean, it's the least I can do after you rescued me from my sidewalk adventure." Alexander hesitated. He knew he should say no. Elena was married to one of his employees, and she was vulnerable. But something in her eyes, a loneliness that matched his own, made him nod, just for a few minutes. Eleanor's home was warm and inviting in a way that surprised Alexander. The living room was filled with books, soft throws, and the kind of personal touches that spoke of someone who cared about creating a sanctuary. Photographs lined the mantelpiece, Elena and Marcus, at various stages of their relationship, though Alexander noticed the more recent photos showed increasing distance between them, even when they were standing close together. "I'll make some coffee," Elena said, disappearing into the kitchen. Alexander wandered around the living room, his attention drawn to a small easel tucked into a corner. On it was a half-finished painting of a sunset over water, executed with obvious skill and deep emotion. "You paint," he said when Elena returned with 2 steaming mugs. "I used to." She handed him his coffee, careful not to let their fingers touch. "I haven't had much time lately. This is beautiful." "You're talented." Elena looked at the painting as if seeing it for the first time. "Marcus says it's a waste of time, that I should focus on more practical things." Alexander felt a surge of anger toward Marcus, but he kept his voice neutral. "What do you think?" "I think ... Elena paused, sitting down on the couch. "I think I've forgotten what I think about a lot of things." They sat in comfortable silence, drinking their coffee. Alexander found himself studying Elena's face in the soft lamplight. She was beautiful, but it was more than that. There was an intelligence in her eyes, a depth that suggested she had stories to tell and dreams she'd put on hold. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said suddenly. "Of course. In all the time you've known Marcus, has he ever talked about me? About us?" Alexander set down his mug carefully. The truth was, Marcus rarely mentioned his personal life at all. When he did, it was usually to complain about domestic obligations interfering with work. But Alexander couldn't bring himself to say that to Elena. "He's mentioned that you're very supportive of his career," he said diplomatically. Elena laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Supportive, yes, I suppose that's one way to put it." She looked at Alexander directly. "Do you know why he missed dinner tonight?" "Elena, I don't think he's working on the Morrison project. The one that's been consuming him for months. The one that's apparently more important than our anniversary, my birthday, and every other milestone in our relationship." Alexander felt his stomach drop. He knew about the Morrison project, he'd assigned it to Marcus. But he'd also made it clear that it wasn't urgent, that there was plenty of time to complete it without sacrificing personal time. "Elena, I need to tell you something about that project." She looked at him expectantly. "It's not due for another 6 weeks. There's no reason Marcus needed to work on it tonight. Or most of the nights he's been staying late, for that matter." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. She set down her coffee cup with shaking hands. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that Marcus is choosing to work late. It's not because he has to." Elena stood up abruptly, walking to the window. Outside, the suburban street was quiet and peaceful, a stark contrast to the turmoil in her heart. Why would he do that? Alexander stood too, moving closer to her but maintaining a respectful distance. "I don't know. But I do know that if I had someone like you waiting for me at home, work would be the last place I'd want to be." Elena turned to face him, and for a moment, the air between them crackled with an energy that neither of them had expected. Alexander's eyes were dark with sincerity, and Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the feeling of being truly seen. Double quotes Mr. Stone. "Alexander, please, Alexander." His name felt different on her lips than she'd expected. "I should ask you to leave." "Yes," he agreed quietly. "You should." But neither of them moved. They stood there in the soft light of Elena's living room. two people who had found an unexpected connection in the midst of their respective loneliness. "I've been married for 7 years," Elena said softly. "And I can't remember the last time my husband looked at me the way you're looking at me right now." Alexander's jaw tightened. "Elena ... Like I matter. Like I'm worth his time and attention." "You are worth it," Alexander said firmly. "You're worth so much more than you know." Tears spilled down Elena's cheeks again, but these felt different from the ones she'd shed on the curb. These tears carried the weight of recognition. The recognition that she deserved better than what she'd been accepting. "I don't know what to do," she whispered. Alexander reached out, gently wiping away her tears with his thumb. The gesture was tender, careful, and it made Elena's heart ache with longing. "You don't have to figure it all out tonight," he said softly. "But you do have to stop accepting less than you deserve." The sound of a car pulling into the driveway broke the moment. Eleanor's eyes widened as she recognized the engine sound. Marcus was home. "I should go," Alexander said, but Elena caught his arm. "Wait, I want him to see you here. I want him to know that someone cared enough to make sure I got home safely." Alexander nodded, understanding the subtext. Sometimes the most powerful statements were the quiet ones. Marcus walked through the front door, his tie loosened and his hair disheveled from what Elena now realized was not actually stress from work. He stopped short when he saw Alexander standing in his living room. "Mr. Stone? What are you doing here?" "I was giving your wife a ride home," Alexander said evenly. "She was stranded downtown." Marcus looked confused. "Stranded? Elena, what's he talking about?" Elena found her voice, and with it, a strength she hadn't felt in years. "I was waiting for you, Marcus. At Romano's. For our anniversary dinner." Marcus's face went pale. "Oh God, Elena, I'm so sorry. I completely forgot. The Morrison project isn't due for 6 weeks," Alexander interrupted quietly. "And it's not urgent." The room fell silent. Marcus looked between his wife and his boss, seeming to realize for the first time that he'd been caught in his own web of excuses. "I should let you two talk," Alexander said, moving toward the door. He paused next to Elena, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Remember what I said about deserving better." After Alexander left, Elena and Marcus stood in their living room like strangers. The silence stretched between them, heavy with years of unspoken resentments and growing distance. "Elena, I can explain. Can you?" Eleanor's voice was steady, now clear. "Can you explain why you've been lying to me? Why you've been choosing to stay away from home? Why our anniversary meant so little to you that you couldn't even remember it?" Marcus sank into a chair, looking older than his 35 years. "It's not that simple." "Then make it simple for me." Marcus was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to be married to you anymore, Elena. I don't know how to be the man you need me to be." The honesty in his admission was like a punch to the gut, but it was also a relief. Finally, they were talking about the truth. "So instead of talking to me about it, you just disappeared. I thought if I gave you space, if I focused on work, maybe we'd figure it out." Elena sat down across from him, studying the man she'd married. "Marcus, we can't figure anything out if we're not even trying. If you're not here." "I know." He looked up at her, and for the first time in months, she saw the man she'd fallen in love with. "I know I've been terrible. I know I've hurt you. But I don't know how to fix this." Elena thought about Alexander's words, about deserving better, about the way it felt to be truly seen. "Maybe we can't fix it," she said quietly. Marcus's eyes filled with tears. "Don't say that. Marcus, when was the last time you were happy to see me? When was the last time you looked forward to coming home? When was the last time we had a conversation that wasn't about logistics or schedules? Marcus opened his mouth to answer, then closed it. The silence was answer enough. I've been thinking about this for months, Elena continued. Tonight just made it clear. We're not happy, Marcus. We haven't been happy for a long time. But we can work on it. We can go to counseling. We can try harder. Elena shook her head. I've been trying harder for 2 years. You've been trying to disappear for 2 years. That's not a relationship, Marcus. That's just existing in the same space. The next few weeks passed in a blur of difficult conversations, lawyer meetings, and the slow, painful process of untangling. A life they built together. Elena moved out of the house they'd shared, finding a small apartment downtown that had excellent natural light for painting. Marcus was surprisingly cooperative about the divorce proceedings. Perhaps he was as relieved as Elena to finally stop pretending they were something they weren't. They were able to remain civil, even kind to each other, which Elena took as a sign that they were making the right choice. One evening, as Elena was setting up her easel in her new apartment, her phone rang. Alexander's name appeared on the screen. Hello, she answered, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. Elena, I hope I'm not calling at a bad time. Not at all. I was just trying to remember how to paint again. Good. That's really good. Alexander paused. I heard about you and Marcus. I'm sorry. Thank you. Though I think sorry might not be the right word. I think congratulations might be more appropriate. Alexander laughed, and the sound made Elena smile. In that case, congratulations. You deserve to be happy. I'm working on it, Elena said, looking out her apartment window at the city lights. It's scary, starting over, but it's also exciting. I know the feeling. Do you? I've been thinking about making some changes myself, about what's really important. Elena felt her pulse quicken. What kind of changes? Well, for starters, I realized I've been working too much, missing out on things that matter. And I've been wondering if maybe you'd like to have dinner sometime. When you're ready. No pressure, no expectations. Just ... Two people who know what it's like to put important things on hold. Elena looked at her half-finished painting, then at the city beyond her window, full of possibilities she'd forgotten existed. I'd like that, she said softly. I'd like that very much. Good. How about Friday? I know a place that has excellent pasta and doesn't require sitting on curbs. Elena laughed, really laughed for the first time in months. That sounds perfect. After she hung up, Elena stood in her apartment, feeling something she hadn't experienced in years, anticipation for the future. She picked up her paintbrush and began to work on the sunset she'd abandoned months ago. But this time she found herself painting not just the end of the day, but the promise of dawn on the horizon. Outside her window, the city hummed with life and possibility. Elena smiled as she painted, thinking about second chances, about the courage it took to start over, and about the man who had seen her worth when she'd forgotten it herself. Sometimes the most beautiful stories began with an ending, and sometimes, when you were brave enough to walk away from what wasn't working, you discovered that the best part of your life was still waiting to be written. As Elena added the final touches to her painting, she realized that sitting on that curb in the rain had been the best thing that could have happened to her. Not because it was easy or pleasant, but because it had finally shown her the truth about her life and given her the courage to change it. The sunset in her painting was breathtaking, full of warm colors and endless possibilities, just like the future she was finally brave enough to claim.